Welcome to the Leading Movement Health Series, and I'm your host, Phil Wagner, founder and CEO of Sparta Science. And here we host discussions with invited guests who have this vast experience at the intersection of both leadership and health. And a lot of times in our cases, we talk about movement health, which is the ability to move without pain or without fear. And whether it's health or movement health, a lot of times we have the data and often some of the insights. So what's blocking us a lot of times is how do we help and enable leaders, enable organizations to have more success. And today's guest, we have RC Buford. And RC was hired by the Spurs as a scout, basketball scout, in 1994. So he was hired by the Spurs as the head basketball scout in 1994, and then quickly moved into the front office initially as a general manager. Now he operates as a CEO. And RC was a two-time NBA Executive of the Year. And the reason I'm so excited about this episode is one of the most transient environments is professional sports. And we'll get into it, certainly encountered even more challenges during COVID. But with sports, you're constantly having to evaluate the new while you're balancing what has worked in the past and that interplay. And health of athletes and organizations plays such a large role both in the culture as well as performance. So I want to express my gratitude and welcome RC to the show.
Thanks, Phil. Excited to spend some time together.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I'm so grateful with RC is, he's kind of in the thick of it with the NBA draft coming up, and Spurs have the number one pick, which has caused a lot of excitement and challenges at the same time. So with that in mind, RC, talk a little bit about why health is important, at least in your mind, for the San Antonio Spurs.
Well, we've had every team is required to be built differently due to circumstances, due to the ability of draft positioning, free agents markets, etc. And our biggest challenge over a 20-year period was we had an incredibly stable roster with Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, and Tony Parker together and aging, and managing their careers from the time they were 19, 20 to the time they played till they were 40. And I think all of them had different environments to overcome. Manu played 24 months of national team play over the course of his career, which that's another 3 NBA seasons on top of playing professionally for 20 years. Then he played another 250 playoff games, which is another 3 or 2.5 NBA seasons at extremely high levels. So managing the workload at a time that there wasn't a lot of validated research and evidence-based practices how to manage careers. And we were fortunate with Greg Popovich as our coach that he had an unbelievable gut feel on how to manage careers, how to manage minutes, how to balance practice time and performance time. And then there were also structures within that required us to change the way we trained and treated our athletes. We had a very international team. In our 2014 championship, 11 of our 14 guys were born outside the United States. And so their expectations for what player care looked like was different than what the traditional American sports model presented as a trainer in one room, a strength coach in another, and a doctor in a different building. They had grown up in a much more integrated, preventative environment than the American typical model built. And so it caused us to think differently, to study outside environments and really try to go around the world and learn how player care was best advanced through many different sporting and industry environments. And I think being open to learn, recognizing that there were best practices anywhere, and I think we learned as much from our players. That was the other part that I learned in this health journey that we're on, is this can't be a one-way directional environment. The more feedback and give and take that we have as patients in our own environment, I think we all feel better when we go into a practitioner and they listen to us, as opposed to walking into the room with only answers. And I think that was a big part of what we found as we listened to our players, as we listened to our coach, as we listened to, the people that were really respected healthcare providers around the world.
Yeah, that's great. I certainly, myself, and I think a lot of people were aware of, the international players. I guess I hadn't really recognized how their upbringing in sports was so different, and as a result, helped shape your culture, right? And how important it is to be listening and learning, right? So you can make those changes that maybe you didn't anticipate, but ultimately worked out exceptionally well.
We changed the entire structure of our medical staff. And while we've had our head athletic trainer, who's been with us since 1998, his longevity has been incredibly impactful with our program. We have now had leadership from Australia, from the UK, from South Africa, and currently from Spain in our player wellness model. That has then helped us find practitioners from around the world that bring unique skills and create. The other part of this is it's really incredibly difficult to develop trust in the work health environment, and it can be compromised incredibly quickly. And so the more that you listen, the more that you can meet the individual where they are in their life journey, the better that trust relationship happens, and then it gets converted throughout your program.
I think what's fascinating is I was chatting with Lieutenant General Kaufman at Army Futures just down the road from you. His leadership lesson was meet people where they are. So, it's great to have some of these, overlapping concepts, right, that around leadership and how to build that trust, because ultimately, people want to be listened to, as you're talking about, and not dictated, and the learning is bi-directional. One of the things I'm curious about is, as you are treating some of the players differently because they have different player loads, how do you balance, or do other players say, hey, that's not fair, he's playing more, he's playing less, he's practicing less? It's always the have not challenges.
Well, so it really, that issue specifically was impetus for us to change our entire developmental program. As Duncan, Parker, Ginobili got to be in their 30s, late 30s. All three of them played. Tony played till he was 39. Manu played till he was 41. Tim played till he was 40. And it was clear to us that we couldn't practice hard with those guys and expect them to be able to perform over a lifetime course. At the same time, we didn't want the new players that came into our program to look at those guys and think that's what it was like to be a professional.
Right.
So we entirely revamped our developmental model. Our video room now consists of 5 former college or professional basketball players that can step into the role of practice dummy to give the developmental needs of new players, young players, so that they get the opportunity to grow. And we really don't talk about it, or haven't talked about it, as they're doing that and you have to do this. It's more, this is what you need to do to be a professional. This is what you need to do to develop your skills, and really focusing on the individual again, where they are. And that's not the same across an entire roster. Now we have a team where there were 5 19-year-olds and 11 players, 23 or young. So that model looks differently than it did at that point in time. But I think the benefits that we've gotten in the performance environment, in the skill development environment, have been accelerated because of the changes that were brought on managing the health of Tim, Tony, and Manu. And then from that, we also have learned that the life development needs of a 20-year are different than a 40-year-old. And again, meeting people where they are, we're currently redesigning what that holistic, put the human in the middle and create the environment around them to be healthy.
Mm. Yeah, I'm just, laughing as you're talking too in the player development model. It's like you have stuntmen, if you will, for some of the older players that, are filling in to simulate, without losing that flow you're trying to encourage. You mentioned the facility too. One of the things I want to talk about is, a big part of the future for the Spurs and a big project of yours has been this new training facility that I believe is set to open up later in the year. So, I think that's a big part of the future that you've been driving and seeing. Talk a little bit about, what you're seeing there.
In 2014, our championship final series with Miami, and the year before, 13 and 14, that was when we really saw this growth of media, and the finals blew up to this massive event that required time, space, and accommodations differently than what we'd experienced in the need of our facilities before. At the same time, we were learning about sports science and sports analytics and the way we train and treat and recover our athletes. And the hydrotherapy was much different than when we first built our building. And so it became clear that we needed to upgrade facilities, and it began a journey that we are now in the middle of completing, where we are bringing together not just our performance for our team, but really working on a community human performance campus that will bring together academia, that will bring together technology, that will bring together professional sports, not only our team, but our goal is to have sporting environments from all over the world use this as an epicenter for researching human factors across physical performance, organizational and social performance, cognitive performance, the sciences. We're partnering with the University of Texas Health System as well as the University of Texas academic system to bring together resources at brain health, to bring together resources on longevity, to bring together the technology aspects that we can, that will hopefully take what we are finding in maybe researching around elite sport and then democratize that across. Andy Walsh, who's the visionary of the Performance Institute, is a world leader, former Australia Institute of Sport leader, been the head of performance for the USOC. Andy has this vision for humans, humanity. So what we learn about the individual can then be translated to the larger groups of teams and organizations, and then can be scaled across our communities and across the world, hopefully.
Yeah, it's what keeps coming out as you're talking, you keep using the word integration, right? It's certainly the integration of different disciplines, right? But also different types of organizations, not just your own, right? As a way to really kind of establish almost a center of learning, as I hear you talk.
So here's one of our pilot projects is been markerless motion capture. And there's a research institute in San Antonio that does almost $1 billion in nonprofit research called Southwest Research Institute. And their work is from the bottom of the ocean, those pressurized submarines, to outer space, working with NASA, with SpaceX. We're located proximity right in the middle of a lot of the aerospace and automobile industry. Tesla headquartered in our region. Toyota's got a big presence here. So they do research in a lot of things, and they stood up a biomechanics lab about the same time in the early 2010s that we were starting to advance our interest in sports science. They have a biomechanics lab. They're going to have a lab on campus. And we've been working on markerless motion cap with a couple of Major League Baseball teams. And they've taken that system that they're developing, they've put it in an Alzheimer's Institute, and they're starting to recognize early onset symptoms of Alzheimer's through motion capture gait and biomechanic analysis before symptoms might be happening that are typical Alzheimer's symptoms. And so that's an example of how we might see what we learn with athletes translated throughout an entire world.
I love that. Yeah, and baseball to Alzheimer's is not a clear, obvious connection.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, I think RC, I know you've got a lot going on right now with the draft, and kind of I always like to wrap things up, at least for me, to kind of lessons that I've picked up from you. And one is how every organization is built differently, and in your case, in anybody's case, organizations also change over time. They're not the same either, and you guys have done a great job adapting. And I think the second point takeaway for me is meeting people in your organization where they are, right? And that allows you to learn from them to also help with those transitions of your organizational culture. And I think the third piece is that integration is so important because you really learn so much from other places because they've got fresh eyes, fresh ways of looking at things, like the Alzheimer's baseball example. There's going to be parallels that, people may have not thought of on either side of the table.
I guess the thing that I catch a lot of grief for, but I also think it's one thing that makes our group unique is just being curious. And I think when we think we figured it out is when we really set ourselves up to fail.
That's great. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think constantly having that desire to continue to learn, because the world is certainly changing almost rapidly on a daily basis.
It's what brought us together first years ago, Phil.
That's right.
An interest in looking how we might identify body compensation imbalance that then turn into injury risks.
Right. So. That curiosity, that rooted. I love it. Well, RC, thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you, Phil. Enjoyed the time.